All right, gang. I wanted to take a minute, and we had a request to kind of walk through some of the key components of our Tier 2 supports, specifically around check and connect and check in and check out. Hopefully the goal here is I'm gonna have kind of a casual kind of walk through some things to think about for those of you that'll be coordinating or actually providing the intervention. So this isn't all inclusive, but it just kind of gives us a place to start when it comes to the conversation. One of the things I will say about, obviously, we know with our MTSS framework, tier two strategies are those strategies we're going to give for those students who need a little something extra. Those are going to be those kids who aren't necessarily responding behaviorally as well as we would like to the tier one interventions, such as our school-wide expectations, our acknowledgement systems, those types of things, the standard discipline process. So when we'd have a kid that might be eligible for tier two interventions, those are going to be kids that kind of show up in our data with a teacher referral or even through our screening processes through like universal screeners, surveys, things like that. So, not to go too far into all that, but I just want to kind of give you an idea of how our students may arrive at needing those tier two supports. And we're really going to hone in on just one component commonly of those tier two interventions. So the first one I'll mention, which is actually the lowest effort, we would call it, like low effort interventions at tier two, which is going to be check and connect. What check and connect is really, it's a lot of times for those kids that just need somebody to have eyes on them in the morning. They're really just one of those kids who maybe they've got a stressful home life, or maybe they have a different diagnosis like autism, ADHD, anxiety, something like that, where really they just need, when they get off the bus or out of the car, they just need someone to touch base with to kind of get their feet on the ground. These kids are probably not always going to be your most severe behavioral challenges in your scheme of things, but they are going to be some kids who just really seem to benefit from that early connection. And some of these kids might even be the kids that they find their way to the office or to people already. So we might as well create a more structured process for that. There is a way, and this is something I'll talk about as we go. I like to view check in, check out, and check and connect kind of on a continuum. And I put check in or check and connect. Gosh, we're going to use a lot of words, right? This check and connect as the on the far left side of that least in intensity intervention. A lot of times, those are going to be kids that we just do that in the morning. We're going to get them off the bus or out of the car, and we're just going to do that little quick check and connect, make sure they're doing all right. Check on how their night went, think about their morning, have a little conversation about how the day might go, what might be different, what might be the same, some things they're worried about, so on and so forth. But really, that's kind of it. There's usually no formal paperwork, no daily progress reports, nothing like that. It's really just about getting eyes on a kid and having a conversation and really kind of creating that connection. Now, there will be some conversation that we'll have sometimes. And every school gets to kind of make this decision what's going to look like. Is we'll have some people that will do like a check and connect that does have a beginning of the day and at the end of the day. And every once in a while, someone will put one in the middle of the day. Now, the difference with this and like check in, check out is, again, it's just getting eyes on the kid. There's no daily progress reports. There's there's not a lot of tracking. The data systems are going to be the traditional data systems anyways. So this is a big thing. Check and connect too. I also tell people it's usually better if this is someone outside of the classroom teacher, because it gives the kid access to a broader relationship network. It's nothing against the classroom teacher, but it gives the kid access to a broader social network within the building. And really for this one, whoever just the kid connects the best with, whoever, because certain kids have certain personalities that go better with certain types of adults. So check in, check out is when we become a little more formal as we move across. And the big thing we're looking at with check in, check out is those big four things we're trying to do is we're trying to increase structure, increase relationships, increase the instruction on the expectations like be safe, be respectful, be responsible, and give the kid feedback on how they're doing in meeting those expectations. So the big thing about check in, check out that you'll notice when we go from that check in, check and connect, which is more just relationships, kind of getting eyes on kids, having some conversations. Now we're going to move to something a little bit more structured that has those key components where we're trying to really provide an intervention and do a lot more tracking and intentional practice on this. The kids that'll benefit the most from this are going to be kids who have low level disruptive behaviors, kids that do tend to end up in the office for smaller infractions and things like that, and students who find adult attention reinforcing. The kids we're going to be careful with this, and I'm not going to say never, but be careful with, are kids whose behavior serves the function of escape. So I got to be careful that the kid's not using check in, check out as a form of escape. And that's something we can kind of look into and say, goodness, he keeps, getting out of class at those times when the work gets hard or he gets bored or whatever it might be. And students with serious or violent behaviors. Now, I will say this, I have written more advanced behavior plans that will have check in, check out as a component, but it would never be a standalone for a kid with that level of behavior. Also, students with referrals that come from only one location. Obviously in those situations, we're going to target what's happening in those locations. We're not going to do a broad sweeping strategy like check in, check out. And students with significant academic deficits. Of course, we're going to address those academic deficits. We're going to really focus on skill development rather than implementing something just like check in, check out. And we can also look at how these things also factor in, with adult attention, peer attention, and also lack of academic or organizational skills. Remember I said if a kid's struggling academically and it's skill-based, meaning they need more math, they need more reading, then obviously we need to find ways to get more math and more reading to them. But we also might have kids, this is especially true with ADHD and autism, some kids that really they don't have a intellectual limitation or skill issue, they have an organizational issue. And check in, check out can be super helpful for those kids who need help getting the binder straight, make sure they have their homework together, things like that. Every once in a while, and I know this can seem somewhat convoluted, is you can also do a little bit of that with Check and Connect, which is really just about kind of like going through the backpack. I always imagine Check and Connect in its most basic sense is like sometimes imagine when your kids come home from school and you're kind of going through the backpack with them. That's an example of what Check and Connect is really just that kind of that process. So the kind of the daily components that you'll see in a standardized check in, check out, my image ate into that a little bit, but it should say feedback. Check in is going to be at the beginning of the day. We're really going to look at the schedule. We're going to spend some time with the student talking about what's the day hold. For some of our kids with more significant needs, we might even use a visual schedule. In fact, a lot of the elementary kids, I recommend a tangible schedule at least, and overlay with images would be my recommendation, especially for kids in elementary. We might also do some skill development. If we have kids who might read a social story, we might practice some skills like how to ask for help or how to talk with my peers or things like that. So I might have that as a part of my check-in. Sometimes you'll also see the opportunity as a check-in as a formal based in emotional literacy check-in, which would be something like zones of regulation, the feelings thermometer, things like that, where the kid actually has a standardized, almost like curriculum or language, where they communicate with the person that's doing the check-in with them to kind of say, I'm green, I'm yellow, I'm red, and it gives more of a direct statement about where they are in their emotional status when they're coming in. So those things can all be part of that check-in process. I really think it's important that the team makes a decision on just how intense that check-in or how intense these components need to be. Too often people just kind of cookie cutter this stuff and they end up doing too much or not enough with a student when actually these core components need to be tailored to the specific needs of the student that they're supporting. There are also the component of regular teacher feedback. We get that with the daily progress report, which I'll show you an example of that here in just a second. And then, of course, there's that checkout process, which is where the student brings that daily progress report, or the daily progress report is pulled up digitally, because some kids, we may not send the sheet with them. We might actually have that digitally, and the teachers are filling that out in a specific link, and they're tracking the kid in the specific link. So at the end of the day, we're going to kind of go through and take a look at and check the kid out and talk about what went well today. One thing you do have to be careful about check out is that it just doesn't become an opportunity to remind the kid of all the mistakes they made that day. I always tell people, imagine what that'd be like at work. Is like every day before you leave work, your boss is going to sit down and talk through all the things you did wrong. Imagine you would not be looking forward to the end of the day. So checkout is more just about just kind of getting a sense of how things went, planning for the next day, looking at how they're working towards their goals. The data collection is going to be part of that daily progress report and the progress monitoring. And ideally, and this isn't always possible, but ideally we should have a family participation component, which is going to be sending those daily progress reports to home or scheduling regular times. I've had some teachers who really just would rather not just send a daily progress report home by itself, but actually like to do like a summary phone call, like every third day or every Friday or something like that, just because they want to give some context for how things are going, and then tell the parent like, hey, I'll call you if something gets really out of whack here, but otherwise we'll just go through our DPR data review at the end of each week. So the big things, and I'm not going to read all this stuff to you, but usually there's a coordinator and then there's facilitator. So there's the person who has that master list of all the kids on check in, check out, who is kind of making sure that those kids are assigned the specific facilitators and making sure that those facilitators have had the opportunity to collaborate and build a plan that is specific to that student's needs and that they know exactly how to implement that plan. And that would be also the person that would sit down with the facilitator and talk through how that student is responding to check in, check out. And so that coordinator is going to be organizing things, probably going to be doing a lot of work with the kids directly, but really just kind of managing things. And then the facilitator is going to be the people doing that day-to-day work. They're going to be doing the people who are doing that check-in and also made the skill development, schedule review, making sure that daily progress report is getting around and getting back and looking over that data and then feeding that stuff back to the coordinator. So the big thing we're going to look at to kind of get this off the ground is we got to figure out how do we identify students who are going to access this support. Like I said, every school has to decide what this looks like because every school's behavioral needs are different. We design and create that daily progress report. We collect that information, and then we determine a response, which obviously is going to be determined by, is the student's behavior improving? Are they meeting the goal? If their goal is to hit 80%, are they hitting that 80%? So on and so forth. And we use that student data then to decide, all right, now what's next for this kid? Do we need to tweak the check-in? Do we need to focus more so on one goal versus another? Do we need to add an incentive element to this? And how does that factor in as well? And then we'll talk about the fading and graduation later. So the DPR or daily progress reports, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that. Everybody's probably seen a million of these. The biggest thing about the DPR is it has to be very user friendly for the teacher especially, and also for the student to understand. I've seen some of these DPRs are like they have 100-point days and half points here or 1,000-point there, whatever, and it's just quite simply too complicated. So we want to create a DPR that is real user friendly, really like Likert scales of like 1 through 3, 1 through 5. Even had some that are like color-based, green, yellow, red, had different shades, have different faces. The one thing I did see with the faces, like smiley face, straight face, frowny face, is some kids would have more of a reaction to that. Although some kids I found really kind of like that because it gives them more of a visual of what that looks like. So a big thing, we want to design something that is simple and easy to do that gives us the data that we need. And here's some basic examples where you can see that. The goals being across the top: be safe, be respectful, be your personal best. And then you can see the class environments on the left, on the column on the left. And then you can see the values of 0 is not yet, 1 is good, and 2 is excellent. And we just use that to build it out. Again, it doesn't have to be super complicated. And if you get a little tech savvy, you can actually do this through a Google link. And the Google link, people can just go in there and do it every day. And then if you have someone who's a little pretty savvy on the back end, that data can be collected through a Google Sheet or Google Form, and then actually can be analyzed using Gemini to look at the trends and things like that, or Notebook LM. There's another example of one. Again, super simple, super simple. Now, here's the big thing about if you're going to use this tool, especially as kids get older, the way I think you need to have these built is, can the kid explain it to an adult? If a form is so complicated that the kid can't understand it, it's really hard to think that they would have buy-in. So I think what you want to think about is, how do we create a tool that the kid even could explain to an outside adult? So that's just something to think about as kids get older. Because if we want to teach self-management, which I think is ultimately the long-term goal, we would want to create tools that the kid would understand what's being used. So we're doing it with them and not to them. So one thing we can layer into check in, check out, especially with DPRs, is progressive earning systems. And progressive earning systems are just like they sound. When kids if he hits 80%, X number of days, he gets to work towards this certain thing, and the kid kind of helps decide what that thing might be. So I just think that that's one of those things where we can layer in a reinforcement system that's connected to their DPR, and I found it to be quite effective. Now, one thing you will have to think about, and this is kind of a whole other talk, is deciding what are reasonable reinforcers for this kid, things that you can actually pull off, and then also asking what things are motivating for the kid. The big thing you got to remember about with kids is usually they'll habituate or get used to reinforcers sometimes quickly. So you got to have about 3 or 5 things that you're kind of rotating that kid's picking from. And you can also do different scales that'll help identify what kind of things kids like. Some kids like stuff, which I found a majority of kids, it's probably the minimum. They'll accept free stuff, but a lot of kids, they want time with adults. They want specific types of play activities. So, kind of really getting with that kid and seeing what motivates them and connecting that to that daily progress report performance. And then collecting that data and kind of analyzing it. This is an example of a student whose goal was to hit 80%, and you can kind of see how the days kind of plot against this. In a perfect world, this is like what we'd want to create. And again, like I said earlier, if you can, and I don't know, I'm sure the ISD might be able to help out with this potentially with some tech support. But if you have somebody that knows how to use Google Forms pretty well, and then moves that over into Google Sheets and then uses Notebook LM, it'll probably run pretty much all your data and create all your visuals for you in that way. So one of the things that we're going to really think about and look at is, really looking at, will we continue the intervention? Would we modify it? Do we intensify it? Are we going to fade it? Those kinds of things. But moving toward the idea that we want students to develop a real sense of ownership of this process and this plan. We want them to be a part of their goal setting. We want them to be a part of the evaluation. And here's one thing I will say about recording. The DPR for some kids is embarrassing. They don't want to carry around the form all day. So rather than create another trigger for them to have negative behavior, one of the things that you can do is, again, create it on the back end with technology. Some kids, and I get it, they don't want to stick out. They don't want to look like the bad kid, for lack of better terms, in their own mind. That has to carry around the behavior sheet. Some kids don't care, but don't make the point. Don't ruin the intervention with an element of the process that could be modified otherwise. So that's just something to think about as you're working on this. And also the reinforcement component, we talked about daily progress or progressive earning and how we can kind of build that in. And also kids being able to start to learn how to apply those skills that they're learning. We talked about you can use things like social stories, practice sessions, role play, things like that in that check-in process, and then kids starting to actually implement those things. A big question I usually get about check-in, check-out is, because you can create a real bond with a kid, is do you have to fade check-in, check-out, or do kids have to graduate? And the answer is no. Especially in elementary, I am completely fine with kids who might need to stay on check-in, check-out for the duration of their elementary experience, especially kids with ADHD, autism, anxiety, and that have varying challenges in their home environment, because it acts as a maintenance and support strategy that we're not going to pull out, because it's actually doing a pretty good job for them. Now, ideally, yes, would we want to fade and graduate? Of course, we'd want to fade and graduate, because that allows more opportunity for the staff that was providing that intervention to potentially support other students. So it's not a must, but if we can, we would like to. The big thing is having a plan. The first thing is we don't want to do any harm. So we don't want to remove this support and create unnecessary emotional harm to the child. We want to have a plan. We want to talk about what that fading might look like. So that's important. We're going to be talking to the kid about what that fading looks like. We're not going to surprise them. Obviously, we're going to do it with them and not to them. And then the fading could be like we go from 5 days a week to 3 days a week to 2 days a week to Monday, Friday kind of thing. So you can fade it in a way that's more conscientious of the kid. And what you will find is some kids will say they're fine with fading, and then you'll start fading it, and then they'll start sabotaging. So that's just giving you that signal that it's not that's not working for them. And then also that would be one of those red flags. You start to see that regression as it comes about. All right, so that's kind of the long and short, I guess I would say, of that check and connect and check and check out continuum. I just think this is one of those things where you got to kind of make it your own. Let me stop sharing my screen real quick. There we go. Sorry for the pause there. Stop share. Okay. This is one of those things where I think you have to kind of build it specifically for the needs of your students. I can't give you a script, although there is some nice things on pbis.org and PBIS World and Midwest PBIS that can give you some potential ideas around check in, check out, and check and connect. The big thing is you got to make it your own, but when you make it your own, make sure it's not just shooting from the hip, that you actually have some structure and that you have very specific things that kids get when they are enrolled in this tier 2 support within your building. So as you guys know, if you need anything from me, just don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to help any way I can. And one thing I will say that a lot of schools struggle with this is they talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and they don't plan it, they don't implement it. You're getting this video in enough time, you could be trying this with some kids more formally this spring and really tightening up your check and connect process and your and your check in, check out process. You could go ahead and start building that out. And I think that would be something that would be really good to kind of work through some of the kinks in that through the spring and be really in a good place coming into the fall. So I think that would be a great opportunity that you wouldn't want to waste with the time this fall. So, all right. Well, I hope this was helpful. And of course, as you know, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to give me a call. All right. Thanks. Bye.